It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about three things. First of all, I'd like to invite you to consider looking at countries in general, and Israel in particular, in a completely different way to the way that we're used to looking at countries, and especially Israel. Then, I'd like to explain why, if we want people to advocate for Israel, we need for them to be attracted to it, especially young people. And finally, I want to share with you a story of Israel that I know from experience works and has the power to get people to fall in love with it. Okay? At the very end, I'm going to explain why the people in this room are the most important people in the world. Okay, so it's worth waiting and worth waiting for that. All right, so we're going to start, and what I'm going to ask you to do is to forget everything that you think about when you think about telling Israel's story, whether it's hasbara or in its otherwise known word in English, hasbara, which means exactly the same, but nobody, if they don't know Hebrew, knows what it means. But ultimately, put it all aside, and what I want to invite you to do is to walk into a supermarket with me. Okay, imagine you're in a supermarket, and you take your cart and you start shopping around. But you realize very quickly that this is not your standard, regular, run-of-the-mill supermarket. You're not there to buy detergent. You're not there to buy toothpaste. You're actually there to buy a country. All right? And I like to call this supermarket the supermarket of nations. So you take your cart, and you're coming along with me, and you walk down to the first aisle. It doesn't say breakfast cereals. It says travel destinations. Okay? And as you walk down the aisle, you're now thinking, okay, where am I going to go on my next vacation? So you've got Iceland that's saying, come to me, I can get you into a volcano. And then you've got Switzerland over there that's saying, wait a minute, come over here, you can go on a skiing vacation. And there's someone walking around with this tray, this really great Swiss chocolates, right? Because it's Switzerland, and they make great chocolates. And then further down the aisle, you see the cowgirl from Times Square, and she's inviting you to come to Times Square, and you're thinking, wow, I really want to go to one of those Broadway musicals, and you want to experience what New York is all about. So this is the supermarket of nations. There are hundreds of thousands of products on the shelf. And there's not just one aisle. I'm not just talking about vacations. I'm talking about things like, for example, the made-in aisle, meaning when you're thinking of buying a product, let's say a car, are you going to buy a car that's made in Germany, or are you going to buy a car that's made in France, or in China, or in America? All of these things come into our thinking process without us even noticing, because we have an immediate association with different countries around the world. And each one of these countries is, in fact, a product, and that product is trying to get into your shopping cart. What they want you to do is to reach your hand out and put the product in the cart, meaning you want to buy it. And think about it. You guys are here. I'm going to assume that most of you have been here before, but if you haven't been here before and you're going through these next few days of the summit, you're going to discover Israel's story. So you know Israel. But people shop in the supermarket of nations all the time, everywhere around the world. And when they shop in the supermarket of nations, whether they're Jewish or not, they are at some point going to come across this country called Israel. What do they see? What is the story of Israel that they will come across? Now, we do a lot of global research, so I could show you the research, but a very, very smart guy was asked this question, and he gave, I think, the answer that represents what most people think. Let's see.
Homer? Homer? You know, our Bible study group is going to the Holy Land next month. I'd like you and your family to come as my guests.
Let me think. Take my family to a war zone, on a bus filled with religious lamos, in a country with no pork, in a desert with no casinos. Oh, where do I sign up?
Homer, I can hear your sarcasm from inside the house, and the dishwasher's on.
Okay, so this was the experience and the story that Homer Simpson was telling the world. This was from about 10 years ago. It was from a 3-part series of the greatest story ever doed, because that's what Bart likes to say and Homer likes to say. And here we go. This is Jacob, Yaakov, the very angry Israeli tour guide who kept on telling everyone to shut up all the time. It was played by Sacha Baron Cohen. And it was really funny because Homer was walking around and all you could see was the kotel, you could see religious people, you could see soldiers, and then at some point they end up in the desert. Homer has an epiphany, he thinks he's the Messiah, and he makes world peace in the Holy Land, right? This is the story. And it's kind of cute and kind of funny, and we all laugh. But the odd thing about it is, who do you think writes The Simpsons? It's actually a bunch of Jewish 30-something-year-olds in America telling the story of Israel as the most unattractive place on earth, okay? And this is our own people telling this story. And you ask yourself, if people are walking through the supermarket of nations, are they going to reach out and take this product off the shelf? Rather unlikely, right? So this is important because, you know, it's cute with Homer and Bart and all that stuff, and The Simpsons can be funny. But it's not so cute and not so funny when someone else is telling our story, when it's the BDS movement that's telling our story, when it's Bella Hadid who's talking about us. And we are consistently and constantly referring to the story that they're telling about us and saying, no, that story's not true, we're not like that, let me correct you. But we're forgetting to say what our story is. It's not just who we're not, it's also who we are. And this is important because we can control what we say. And if you don't make a concerted effort to brand your nation, in other words, tell your story, someone else will do it for you and for their own reasons. And we're seeing that, and it's getting very dangerous. We're looking at this whole, inflection of anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism. It's not acceptable, but we can do something about it. And this is particularly important today as we go into sort of 2023. We're not in 1995 anymore. Today, everybody has a cell phone. Everybody is using their smartphones to make decisions, to engage with anything around the world. And there's this amazing statistics from Facebook. In 2019, they discovered that the average person scrolls through their smartphones, through their social media feeds, every single day, the height of the Statue of Liberty. Think about that. That's amazing. And imagine, this was pre-COVID. Okay, so post-COVID, it won't be the Statue of Liberty if they did this research again. It would be the Burj Khalifa. That is how much information is coming to people, especially young people. All these different products that are being sold to them in the supermarket of nations, like I like to call it. And when you combine that with the 8 seconds, which is the average attention span of a Gen Zer or a millennial, 8 seconds, that's all you have. That's all the story you have to tell. You are in a bit of a pickle, as they say in America. And we don't want that to happen because it is absolutely integral for people to want to take that product off the shelf. And why is it so important? Because of the way our brains work. All of us, as human beings, whenever we make a decision, whether it's to buy a product, to support a charity, to vote for a politician, to advocate for a country, any of us go through what's called the engagement ladder, in the sense that we begin at the very bottom of the ladder, where we need to know that this product or person or place exists, right? They need to create attention. Once we know it exists, for example, people know Israel exists, but are they attracted to the story that Israel's telling? Because if they're not, then they're off the engagement ladder, and we don't go further up. I think we can all agree that the objective of us, all of us in the room, and of the state of Israel, is that ultimately people will advocate for it. And I don't mean necessarily in the Israel advocacy capital A sense. I mean just advocate for the country. Tell others that it's great. Support us when we need your support. To get there, you cannot forget about the bottom 2 steps, because the way our brain thinks, it's absolutely linear, and you cannot skip a step. I think a lot of us are focusing too much on trying to get people to advocate for Israel, but we're not asking us, why should they? Why should they want to? We need to give them a great story. Now, what is Israel's story? And here's a little tip to any of you who are influencers and writing about Israel, which I assume most, if not all of you are. I find it much more easy to tell not the story of the state of Israel. That is the job of the government of Israel. Actually, it's much easier to tell the story of the Israeli people, because the Israeli people are very inspiring. And here, this is what they're like when you put them all together. This is the spirit of the Israeli people. So this is who the Israeli people are, and these are all, these are all facts, right? I didn't make this up. This is really who we are. And when you try and pull it all together and you want to create one sentence that really talks about who the Israeli people are, we are an optimistic nation of dreamers and doers, bound together by time and place, which is referring to the 25% of Israeli citizens who are not Jewish. We have to recognize that they're part of Israel's story and actually make it much more interesting to the world, and making our mark on the world. And that's referring to the innovation and the creativity and the startup nation and all that stuff. Now, why am I so excited about this? Why do I know that when you talk about dreamers and doers, that causes people to get engaged? That gets people attracted to Israel. Because my organization, Vibe Israel, has been telling this story to digital influencers with millions of followers from around the world. We bring them to Israel, and we share the story of Israel through what we call their passion point, what it is that they write about. So don't take it from me. Take it, for example, from Rachel. Rachel is an American food blogger with 1 million followers, and as we do every trip that we have, we invite our influencers for a Shabbat dinner. And I love the way she described this. She said experiencing Shabbat dinner was like having Thanksgiving every week. Now that is a storyteller, because what she's doing is she is making Israel, the Israeli experience, relatable to an American through what Americans know and what they care about and their traditions. That is one way of sharing a story. This is Patrick. Patrick is an Italian design blogger who founded a very popular design blog called Design Wanted. Once he hit the 1 million follower mark, he was bought by a larger magazine, and he said, every designer I met so far has a specific expertise, but what they all have in common is the will to be different, to find their own path, to innovate. What a great story, right? And then he showed a ton of pictures and stuff like that, and it was just about design. We weren't having a conversation about who's right and who's wrong in relation to the conflict. And finally, this is Kelly. She's an Australian mummy blogger with 500,000 followers. She spent her week in Israel discovering how we parent and how we live our lives as parents. And what she said was, what I discovered in Israel was a curious mix of deep tradition with mind-blowing, out-of-the-box thinking. That is a story of Israel that people can relate to. And you can bet that Rachel and Patrick and Kelly went up that engagement ladder, and they're even advocates. Kelly went on a radio show in Australia and spoke about her experience. Patrick came back, and now he helps Israeli designers in Milan and so on. So all these people went up that engagement ladder. And now, finally, I have a sort of request to you, the people in the room, and this is what I mentioned before. I'm going to end with a quote from someone who is arguably the biggest brander in the world, the one who knew best how to sell a brand, and that is Steve Jobs of Apple. And I'm going to say something after the quote, so don't stop there. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. You are Israel's storytellers. And I'm going to quote another important person, but with great power comes great responsibility. Please remember, when you tell Israel's story, remember the supermarket of nations. Okay, Israel is just one product on a shelf. There are thousands of others that people can choose. Young Jewish people as well. We've got to give them a good reason to want to connect with Israel. Secondly, remember that we have to give that story in a positive way, not just manage the negative. And finally, when you tell Israel's story, remember that we're an optimistic nation of dreamers and doers. Thanks very much.